I inherited $85 million. Before I could even process the number, let alone tell my husband, the estate attorney looked at his screen and frowned. Ms. Vance, the Georgia State Registry shows you and Marcus finalized an uncontested absentee divorce 60 days ago. I stayed completely silent for 5 seconds. My husband had kissed me goodbye that very morning. We shared a bed the night before. But in those 5 seconds, my brain pieced together his entire scam, and I realized his ultimate betrayal had just become my absolute legal shield. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart someone who thought you were a fool. I was sitting in a high-end law office in downtown Atlanta, staring across a polished mahogany desk at Attorney Sterling. The room smelled of expensive leather and old money, a sharp contrast to the practical, budget-conscious life I lived. I was there to claim an inheritance from my Great Aunt Beatrice. She was the only person in my entire family who saw through the toxic, image-obsessed facade my parents maintained. My parents, Pastor Joseph and First Lady Patricia, led a congregation of thousands in Atlanta preaching humility while exclusively wearing designer labels and driving luxury cars. They demanded perfection and blind loyalty. Aunt Beatrice hated it, and she loved me because I refused to play their game. I am 34 years old, working as a forensic accountant for the state government. It is a job my husband Marcus always belittled. He liked to call my paycheck pocket change, while flaunting his status as a real estate brokerage mogul to my parents, who treated him like the son they never had. When Attorney Sterling slid the heavy portfolio toward me, the number printed at the bottom of the summary page did not look real. $85 million. Aunt Beatrice had quietly built a massive empire in commercial real estate over 5 decades. She liquidated everything before she passed, bypassing my parents completely, and left every single cent to me. I was still trying to remember how to breathe when Attorney Sterling opened the Georgia State Judicial Database to finalize the trust structure. He needed to verify my current marital status for the tax documents. That was when he stopped typing. He took off his glasses, polished them slowly with a microfiber cloth, and looked at me with genuine confusion. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice hesitant, "the system shows that you and Marcus finalized an uncontested absentee divorce exactly 60 days ago. The judgment is fully executed." The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to echo like a hammer. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just sat there, gripping the arms of my leather chair. Marcus and I had been married for nearly 10 years. We had dinner together last night. He kissed my forehead before I left for work this morning, telling me to have a great day at the office. But as a forensic accountant, my brain is trained to find the missing numbers, the hidden transactions, the quiet fraud. I do not react to emotion. I react to data. In 5 seconds, the entire puzzle clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Marcus owned a commercial brokerage firm that had been bleeding money for over a year. I had noticed the late notices in the mail, the frantic phone calls he took in the garage, the way his lavish spending had abruptly shifted to credit cards rather than cash. He had been terrified of losing his status in front of my parents. Marcus knew bankruptcy was coming. But if he filed while we were legally married, my pristine credit score and my substantial government retirement accounts would be dragged into the mess. So he hired a proxy. He used a fraudulent electronic notary service to forge my digital signature on divorce papers. He secretly divorced me to dump his toxic assets and shield whatever cash he had left. He planned to keep living with me, pretending we were married, while legally insulating himself from the financial explosion that was about to hit. What Marcus did not know, what he could not have possibly anticipated, was that I was currently sitting in front of $85 million. Because we were legally divorced 60 days ago, he had absolutely no claim to a single dime of Aunt Beatrice's money. Georgia law is very clear on assets acquired after a divorce is finalized. His desperate illegal attempt to save his own skin had just built an impenetrable fortress around my new fortune. If we were still married, he would have been entitled to half. By trying to ruin me, he had saved me. "Are you all right, Ms. Vance?" Attorney Sterling asked, breaking the silence. He looked genuinely concerned, perhaps expecting a hysterical breakdown. "I am perfectly fine," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Please prepare the trust documents. I will be signing as a single woman. And Attorney Sterling, I need to retain your firm for some additional services. I need to set up a blind trust and an anonymous holding company immediately." I signed the papers with a steady hand. When I walked out of that office, I was one of the wealthiest women in Atlanta. But I got into my reliable 6-year-old sedan and drove back to the house I shared with the man who was no longer my husband. I needed to see his face. I needed to understand exactly how far he was willing to go. When I unlocked the front door, the lights were dimmed. Candles flickered along the hallway leading to the living room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Marcus was standing there in a perfectly tailored suit, surrounded by dozens of red roses. As I stepped into the room, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a velvet box containing a massive diamond ring. "Naomi," he said, his voice dripping with practiced velvety emotion, "these past 10 years have been the best of my life. I know I have been stressed with the business lately, but you are my rock. I want to renew our vows. Let us throw a huge party for our anniversary and show the world how strong we are. Will you marry me all over again?" I looked down at the man kneeling before me on our hardwood floor. He was handsome, charismatic, and completely full of lies. He was asking me to renew vows for a marriage he had already legally terminated behind my back. The sheer audacity of his performance was almost impressive. I forced tears into my eyes, covering my mouth with both hands in feigned shock. "Oh, Marcus!" I gasped, letting my voice tremble just enough. "Yes, of course I will." He stood up, beaming with relief, and slipped the ring onto my finger. It was beautiful, heavy, and sparkling, likely bought with money he was currently hiding from his creditors or obtained through a fraudulent line of credit. He pulled me into a tight hug, kissing the top of my head. I rested my chin on his shoulder, keeping my face completely blank. My heart beat steadily. There was no love left in my chest, only the cold, calculating precision of a woman preparing for war. "I have a surprise for you," he said, pulling away and walking over to his leather briefcase resting on the dining table. "We have been talking about upgrading to a luxury home in Buckhead. I found the perfect property. It has the big garden you always wanted. But we need to move fast to lock in the interest rate, so I had my lawyer draft up a post-nuptial agreement. It is just a standard procedure the bank requires for jumbo loans to expedite the underwriting process." He handed me a thick stack of papers and a sleek silver pen. I took the documents and scanned the first page. My forensic training made it impossible to miss the glaring truth hidden within the paragraphs. This was not a post-nuptial agreement to buy a new house. Buried under layers of dense legal jargon was a quitclaim deed and an assumption of liability clause. Marcus was attempting to transfer massive amounts of his failing company's corporate debt solely into my name. Because the state recognized us as legally divorced, this document would effectively make me fully responsible for his financial ruin while legally protecting him from the fallout. He was trying to financially destroy me so he could walk away completely clean. He wanted to leave me holding the bag for millions in toxic debt while he started over. "You just need to sign on the last page, baby," he said smoothly, walking over to the bar cart and pouring us 2 glasses of expensive champagne. "Then we can start planning the vow renewal. I was thinking we could do it at your parents' church. They would love that." I smiled warmly at him, taking the papers to the kitchen counter. "This is so thoughtful, Marcus. I cannot wait for our new life together." I reached into my purse, pretending to look for my reading glasses, and swiftly swapped his silver pen for my own. It looked identical, but it was a specialized disappearing ink pen I kept for fraud detection demonstrations at the state auditor office. The blue ink would completely vanish within 48 hours, leaving the paper entirely blank with no trace behind. I flipped to the last page and deliberately botched my signature, looping the letters in a careless way that looked completely different from my legal sign-off. I handed the papers back to him. He practically snatched them from my hands, a glint of absolute triumph flashing in his eyes, before he quickly masked it with a loving smile. We drank the champagne. The champagne tasted like ash in my mouth, but I swallowed it with a grin. I ate the expensive dinner he had ordered from my favorite restaurant. I played the role of the adoring, naive wife to absolute perfection. I listened to him talk about his grand plans for our vow renewal, nodding and smiling at all the right moments. I let him believe he had won. By midnight, Marcus was fast asleep, exhausted from his own masterful performance. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb the expensive silk sheets he insisted we buy, and walked silently into his home office. The room was perfectly organized, reflecting the illusion of control he loved to project to the world. I booted up his desktop computer. Marcus was arrogant, but he was not an IT expert. He used the same password for his computer that he used for our home security system. A date he thought I did not know was actually the day he closed his first big commercial deal, a deal he had lied to me about the payout for. I plugged in a high-capacity external hard drive and began mirroring his entire encrypted system to my secure cloud server. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I stood in the dark, watching the files duplicate, thinking about the sheer audacity of the man sleeping in the next room. He thought I was just a boring government auditor who brought home a modest paycheck. He thought my quiet demeanor meant I was weak and easily manipulated. He had no idea that my job literally consisted of tearing apart complex financial crimes and putting arrogant men behind bars. When the transfer reached 100%, I unplugged the drive, wiped the access logs, and returned to my own encrypted laptop at the kitchen island. I bypassed his standard business folders and went straight for the hidden directories. I found offshore bank routing numbers, fake invoice generators, and correspondence with the shady electronic notary who had processed our fake divorce. I found emails detailing how he planned to funnel his remaining cash into a shell company. But it was a specific folder buried deep within his system that made my blood run freezing cold. The folder was heavily encrypted, but his password habits were sloppy. I broke in within 10 minutes. The folder was simply named Camille. Camille is my younger sister. She is 30 years old and the undeniable golden child of our family. While my parents criticized my career choices and my modest lifestyle, they treated Camille like royalty. She was married to Julian, a wealthy white man who paraded around Atlanta, pretending to be a highly successful tech CEO. My parents adored Julian because his presence and supposed generational wealth elevated their status in the elite church circles. Camille got whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it, and she had spent her entire life stepping on me to get it. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the contents and the air left my lungs. There were hundreds of text messages detailing their sordid meetings, hotel booking confirmations under fake names, and intimate photographs that made my stomach churn. The betrayal I had felt at the lawyer's office paled in comparison to the dark, twisted reality unfolding on my screen. Marcus was not just divorcing me to dump his debt, he was clearing the path for something much more sinister. The depth of their deception was staggering, and I realized this was no longer just about protecting my inheritance. This was about destroying the people who thought they could destroy me. I pulled my 5-year-old sedan into the circular driveway of my parents' sprawling Buckhead estate. The massive brick mansion was funded by the tithes of their 10,000-member congregation. Before I even cut the engine, a gleaming silver Porsche roared up behind me, laying on the horn. I stepped out and watched my younger sister Camille emerge from the passenger seat. She was draped in a fresh-off-the-runway designer dress, clinging to the arm of her husband Julian. Julian was a 35-year-old trust fund kid who paraded around Atlanta as a tech startup CEO. Because he was white and came from supposed generational wealth, my parents treated him like royalty. They believed his mere presence elevated their status in the elite mega-church circles. "Nice ride, Naomi," Julian sneered, tossing his Porsche keys to my father's hired valet. "You know, if you ever want to upgrade from that government worker lifestyle, my company is hiring entry-level data entry clerks." I smiled sharply. "I will keep that in mind, Julian. Though, as a forensic accountant, I prefer looking at real numbers, not inflated projections." His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, my mother burst through the massive double doors. First Lady Patricia bypassed me entirely, pulled Camille into a crushing embrace, and kissed Julian on both cheeks. Inside the dining room was an overwhelming display of wealth. crystal chandeliers, silver cutlery, and a spread that could feed a small army. My father, Pastor Joseph, sat at the head of the table holding court. The moment Marcus walked in behind me, having arrived straight from his fake office, my father stood up and offered him a firm handshake. "It is good to see a real provider," my father boomed. "Marcus, my boy, you look tired. You are working too hard to keep a roof over my daughter's head." Marcus chuckled modestly, sliding his arm around my waist. "I do what I have to do for my wife, Pastor. Family is everything." The hypocrisy was suffocating. I smiled at the man who had secretly divorced me 60 days ago. "You really are working overtime, Marcus," I said smoothly. Halfway through the meal, my mother clinked her crystal glass with a silver spoon. She reached under her chair, pulled out a velvet jewelry box, and slid it across the table to Camille. "For my beautiful youngest daughter," my mother announced. Camille opened it, gasping at the dazzling diamond tennis bracelet inside. "You are the pride of this family, Camille. You married well, you maintain your image, and you are carrying the Vance family legacy forward. We are just so blessed." Camille shot me a triumphant smirk as Julian fastened the diamonds around her wrist. My mother then turned to me. Her smile vanished, replaced by the familiar look of absolute disappointment she had worn since I was a teenager. She reached into her designer tote bag and tossed a cheap plastic-wrapped planner onto my plate. It landed with a dull thud next to my roasted vegetables. "I got this on sale at the pharmacy," my mother said loudly, ensuring the entire table heard. Maybe if you kept a better schedule, Naomi Marcus would not look so exhausted, carrying this family on his back. "You need to start pulling your weight. You cannot even give this man a child. The least you can do is organize your household." The room went dead silent. The insult was designed to humiliate me while elevating Marcus. Julian let out a low chuckle. Camille pretended to look sympathetic while adjusting her new diamonds. Marcus placed his hand over mine, playing his role to absolute perfection. "Now, Patricia, do not be too hard on her," he said, his voice dripping with fake benevolence. "Naomi tries her best. Her government job just takes a lot out of her. I do not mind carrying the heavy load. That is what a real man does." I looked at Marcus, then at my mother. I simply picked up the planner and peeled off the plastic wrapper. "Thank you, Mom," I said calmly. "I will definitely start writing down everything I see. You never know when detailed records will come in handy." My mother rolled her eyes and turned her attention back to Julian. Pastor Joseph slammed his fist on the table in joyous celebration. "The new sanctuary project is fully funded," he bellowed, "and it is all thanks to Julian's brilliant investment strategies and Marcus's real estate acquisitions. God has blessed this family with men who know how to multiply his wealth." Julian smirked, swirling his red wine. "It is just basic economics, Joseph. The church expansion fund is sitting in high-yield offshore accounts now. Marcus is handling the property acquisitions through his brokerage." I took a slow bite of my steak. I knew Marcus's brokerage was bankrupt, which meant the millions of dollars my father was bragging about were currently vanishing into thin air. I excused myself, claiming I needed to wash my hands. I walked past the guest bathroom and went straight upstairs to the master suite. I had noticed Camille sneaking up here earlier before dinner started complaining of nausea. I stepped into the bathroom and locked the door. I walked over to the gold-plated trash can next to the vanity. Sitting right on top of a discarded makeup wipe was a plastic stick. I picked it up. A positive pregnancy test. Camille was pregnant. That explained my mother's sudden comment about her carrying the family legacy forward. But it was what I found wrapped around the plastic stick that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a small yellow sticky note. I carefully peeled it off the test. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Marcus's handwriting. I read the words written in blue ink. "I will handle Naomi. The church money is almost ours." I stood in the glaring bathroom light, staring at the physical proof of a betrayal so deep it defied logic. My sister was pregnant with my husband's child. The golden child who had spent her entire life stealing my toys, my clothes, and my parents' approval had now stolen my husband. But the note, combined with the hidden computer files I had mirrored last night, revealed a layer of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. Marcus and Camille were not just sleeping together. They were conspiring to steal from the megachurch's expansion fund. 5 years ago, I would have burst into tears. I would have run downstairs and begged my parents to see the truth. But my parents would have sided with Camille. They always did. They would have called me crazy and delusional. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a forensic accountant with an $85 million war chest. I folded the sticky note and slid it into my pocket. I wrapped the pregnancy test in tissue paper and put it in my purse. I washed my hands, adjusted my lipstick, and walked back downstairs to join the family. I had a lot of work to do, and I was going to enjoy every single second of dismantling their lives. The very next morning, I watched from the kitchen window as Marcus backed his leased Mercedes out of our driveway. He blew me a kiss through the glass. I waved back, holding my coffee mug, waiting until his car disappeared down the street. The moment he was gone, I picked up my phone and called Attorney Sterling. I did not need a marriage counselor, I needed a private intelligence firm. With $85 million securing my future, I did not have to worry about hourly rates or limited resources. By noon, a team of elite corporate investigators was feeding me raw financial data, which I cross-referenced against the encrypted hard drive I had cloned from Marcus. I sat in my home office, my multiple monitors glowing with spreadsheets, bank statements, and offshore wire transfers. Forensic accounting is like untangling a massive knot. You just have to find the right thread to pull and you can unravel an entire empire. I pulled Julian's thread first. My parents worshipped the ground my white brother-in-law walked on. They paraded Julian around our predominantly black megachurch as their golden ticket to Atlanta's elite high society. He claimed to be the CEO of a revolutionary tech startup. But when I tracked his employer identification number and corporate filings, the truth was pathetic. Julian's tech empire was nothing but a registered post office box in Delaware. He had 0 employees, 0 active patents, and 0 revenue. The generational wealth he constantly bragged about was a complete myth. His wealthy father had actually cut him off financially 2 years ago due to his reckless gambling. Julian was dead broke. So how was Julian driving a brand new Porsche and buying Camille diamond tennis bracelets? I followed the routing numbers from his shell company directly back to my father's church. Pastor Joseph and First Lady Patricia had spent the last 3 years soliciting donations from our working-class congregation to build a massive new sanctuary and a youth outreach center. They had raised over $5 million. Because they were so blinded by Julian's arrogant confidence and country club aesthetic, my father had quietly granted him unfettered power of attorney over the church expansion accounts. It was a classic textbook embezzlement scheme. Julian was submitting fake invoices from dummy construction companies for materials that never existed. Marcus, acting as the commercial real estate broker, was signing off on bogus land acquisition fees and environmental surveys. Together, they were siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the church fund every single month. They were bleeding my parents dry, and my parents were too busy bragging about their successful sons-in-law to notice the money was vanishing right under their noses. My phone rang right in the middle of my audit. It was my mother. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. Naomi, my mother snapped, skipping a greeting entirely. I hope you apologize to Marcus for your sour attitude at dinner last night. Julian is taking your father to play golf at the country club today, and Marcus had to go into the office early to clean up your mess. You really need to learn how to nurture your husband. I stared at the wire transfer on my screen showing Marcus moving $50,000 of church money into a Cayman Islands account registered to Camille. I am nurturing him exactly the way he deserves, Mom, I replied smoothly. I am making sure everything he has built is completely accounted for. My mother huffed her disapproval and hung up the phone. 3 days passed. I continued gathering my airtight evidence, building a digital fortress of criminal activity that neither Marcus nor Julian could ever escape. On Thursday evening, Marcus came bursting through the front door. He looked frantic, pulling his expensive leather duffel bag out of the hall closet with exaggerated urgency. "Baby, we have a massive crisis," Marcus said, throwing crisp dress shirts into his bag. "A commercial zoning deal in Chicago is falling apart. I need to catch the last flight out tonight. I might be gone for 3 days. I have to fix this or the brokerage is going to take a huge hit." He looked so stressed, so perfectly panicked. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. If I had not spent the last 72 hours mapping his financial felonies, I would have believed him. I played the role of the devoted, naive wife. "Oh no, Marcus, that is terrible," I said, rushing over to help him pack. "Let me get your toiletry bag from the bathroom. Go grab your chargers from the study." As soon as he turned his back and jogged upstairs, I slipped my hand into my pocket. I took out a micro GPS tracking device I had purchased earlier that week from the security firm. I slid it deep into a hidden zippered pocket in the dark lining of his duffel bag, pushing it down where he would never feel it. When Marcus came back downstairs, I zipped the bag for him and handed it over. "Call me when you land in Chicago," I said, kissing his cheek. "I will be praying for your safe travels." He pulled me close, sighing heavily. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Naomi. I do not know what I would do without you. I will make this up to you, I promise." He hurried out the door. I locked the deadbolt and immediately walked back to my computer. I opened the tracking application on my encrypted laptop. A glowing red dot appeared on the digital map of Atlanta, representing Marcus's duffel bag. I watched the dot move down our suburban street and turn onto the highway. But he did not take the exit for Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Instead, the red dot kept moving straight into the heart of downtown Atlanta. I sat back in my chair, sipping a glass of water as I watched my husband drive his leased Mercedes into the Midtown district. The tracking dot finally stopped at a prestigious address on Peachtree Street. It was an ultra-luxury high-rise building known for its exclusivity and exorbitant rent prices. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged into a specialized public records database I used for state audits. I ran a search on this building's tenant registry for the exact unit number where the GPS signal was pinging. The search results loaded instantly, and a cold smile spread across my face. Marcus had not just rented a secret multi-million-dollar love nest to carry on his affair with my sister Camille. He had leased the luxury penthouse using stolen identity documents. The high-rise apartment was registered entirely under the name Naomi Vance. If the lease was in my name, I did not need to break in. I had full legal authorization to walk right through the front door. I grabbed my purse, locked my house, and drove straight to Midtown. The concierge at the gleaming marble desk barely glanced up when I approached. I handed him my driver license and explained I had lost my key fob. Within 3 minutes, he handed me a master key card with a polite smile, welcoming me to my own apartment. Marcus had used my pristine credit score and stolen my identity to secure a playground for his infidelity, but his arrogance had just given me a front-row seat to his destruction. The elevator shot up to the 42nd floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained completely steady. I swiped the keycard. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. I stepped into a sprawling 2-story penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline. It was decorated in aggressive tacky luxury. White leather sofas, mirrored tables, and empty champagne bottles cluttered the massive marble kitchen island. But it was the overwhelming scent of expensive jasmine perfume that hit me first. It was Camille's signature scent. I walked slowly through the living room, letting the cold reality of their betrayal wash over me. A designer handbag sat carelessly tossed on an accent chair. I recognized it immediately. It was a limited edition Birkin bag that cost more than my annual government salary. Next to it lay a stack of glossy brochures for elite private preschools located in the Cayman Islands. I pushed open the double doors to the master suite. The king-sized bed was unmade. Spread across the velvet bench at the foot of the bed was a collection of maternity clothes tags still attached, all purchased from high-end luxury boutiques. On the nightstand, placed in a custom silver frame, were 3 high-definition sonogram photos. A yellow sticky note was attached to the glass, written in Marcus' familiar handwriting. "Our perfect little prince, counting down the days until we are free." I turned away from the bed and walked into what should have been a home office. Instead, it was a criminal war room. A massive dry erase board took up an entire wall. I stared at the sprawling web of arrows, dates, and offshore routing numbers. Marcus and Camille were not just planning to run away. They had mapped out a meticulously timed exit strategy. The board detailed the final transfer of the church expansion funds. $5 million was scheduled to be funneled through Julian Shell Company, washed through a fake commercial real estate transaction, and deposited into a Cayman trust by the end of the month. The bottom corner of the board featured a checklist written in red marker: transfer funds, finalize divorce, liquidate brokerage, book private charter flight. Resting on the desk directly below the whiteboard was a framed photograph. I picked it up. It was a candid shot of Marcus and Camille laughing at a beach resort holding tropical drinks, looking like the perfect wealthy couple. I traced the edge of the frame, a bitter memory rising to the surface. This was not the first time Camille had used me to shield her own crimes. When I was 18 years old, $10,000 went missing from the church youth ministry fund. I was the treasurer. I had the ledger. But Camille had the sticky fingers. She had stolen the cash to fund a lavish spring break trip with her sorority sisters. Then she planted the empty bank deposit bags under my mattress. When my parents found them, they did not ask for my side of the story. They did not care about evidence. My father called me a thief and a disgrace to his ministry. My mother packed my bags and kicked me out into the street for an entire year. I lived in a cramped, freezing dorm room, eating instant noodles and working 2 minimum wage jobs to survive while Camille drove a brand new luxury sedan my parents bought her as a reward for her unwavering faith. Camille had always taken what was mine, and my parents had always handed it to her on a silver platter. Now she was trying to take my husband and my financial stability. My phone vibrated in my pocket, shattering the silence of the penthouse. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed with my father name, Pastor Joseph. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression even though he could not see me, and answered the call. Naomi! My father barked, his voice echoing with the booming authority he usually reserved for his Sunday sermons. Listen to me carefully. Julian is facing a minor liquidity issue with his tech company. The market is fluctuating, and he needs a bridge loan to cover his payroll this week. I need you to wire $50,000 to his business account by tomorrow morning. I stared at the whiteboard detailing how Julian and Marcus were currently stealing millions from his congregation. Dad, I said calmly, I do not have $50,000 lying around in a checking account. I know exactly what you have, Naomi, my father snapped impatiently. You have that state government retirement account. You can borrow against your 401k. Your mother and I have already co-signed massive commercial loans for Julian, and all our liquid assets are tied up in the church expansion fund. Julian is family, and he is going to make us all extremely wealthy when his company goes public. You need to do this immediately. I am not draining my retirement savings for Julian, I replied, my voice turning to ice. If his company is so successful, he can go to a commercial bank. There was a heavy, furious pause on the line. You listen to me, you ungrateful girl, my father hissed, his righteous facade dropping completely. Julian is a visionary. He is carrying this family legacy forward with Camille. If you refuse to help your brother-in-law, if you let his company fail because of your selfish greed, do not bother coming to Sunday service. Do not bother calling your mother. You will be cut off from this family permanently. Consider yourself warned. He slammed the phone down. The line went dead in my ear. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the stolen empire they had built. I smiled. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took one last look around the penthouse. I did not leave a single trace of my presence. I wiped the doorknobs, pocketed the pregnancy test and the sticky note, and walked out. My father wanted $50,000 by tomorrow morning to save his precious white son-in-law. He was about to get a very different kind of financial transaction. I bypassed my office and drove straight to the towering glass headquarters of Southern Fidelity Bank in downtown Atlanta. Yesterday, I would have been directed to the standard teller line on the ground floor. Today, the moment the concierge typed my name into the system, his eyes widened. He immediately stepped out from behind his podium and escorted me to a private keycard access elevator. I was taken to the top floor reserved exclusively for ultra-high net worth individuals. The regional wealth director, a sharp man named Harrison, was already waiting for me at the doors. He ushered me into a corner suite with panoramic views of the city, offering me sparkling water and a seat on a plush leather sofa. When you deposit $85 million into a banking institution, they do not ask you to wait. They ask you how high to jump. Ms. Vance Harrison said, taking a seat across from me with a perfectly polite smile. "We are thrilled to have your business. How can Southern Fidelity assist you today?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out the corporate identification numbers for Julian Shell Company and Marcus Real Estate Brokerage. "I need you to pull the commercial loan portfolios for these two entities," I said smoothly. "I know they bank with you. I also know they are currently defaulting on multiple high-interest bridge loans." Harrison hesitated, his professional smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Ms. Vance, you understand I cannot disclose private client financials even to a spouse or relative without a court order." I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "I am not asking as a relative, Harrison. I am asking as the sole proprietor of EV Holdings. I am looking to acquire distressed commercial debt. I want to buy their loans off your books, today." Money talks, but $85 million sings a very persuasive song. Harrison nodded slowly, excusing himself from the room. 10 minutes later, he returned with a thick stack of manila folders. As a forensic accountant, I did not need a law degree to read the disaster printed on those pages. Julian and Marcus were drowning. They had taken out over $4 million in commercial loans to cover their extravagant lifestyles and to fund the initial deposits for their offshore accounts. But it was the collateral section of the loan agreement that made my breath catch in my throat. I traced my finger over the authorized signatures. My parents. Pastor Joseph and First Lady Patricia had actually done it. Blinded by Julian's arrogant charm and desperate to secure their proximity to his fake generational wealth, my parents had signed away the ultimate collateral. They had put up the deed to their 10,000-member megachurch to guarantee Julian and Marcus business loans. If those loans defaulted, the bank had the legal right to foreclose on the collateral properties. My parents had literally gambled the house of God on a white con artist and a cheating husband. Harrison cleared his throat nervously. "As you can see, Ms. Vance, these accounts are severely delinquent. We were preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the collateral properties by the end of the month. The bank considers these toxic assets at this point." I smiled, feeling a rush of absolute power course through my veins. "Do not initiate foreclosure, Harrison. EV Holdings will purchase the entirety of this debt portfolio at face value. Draft the assignment of debt contracts immediately. I want the transfer completed before the close of business today." Harrison could not hide his relief. Offloading toxic debt without a lengthy legal battle was a banker dream. He immediately called in his legal team. Within 2 hours, I signed the final transfer agreements. I walked out of Southern Fidelity Bank holding the financial leashes to every single person who had ever wronged me. I was no longer just the scapegoated middle child. I was their sole absolute creditor. I owned the mortgage on my husband's business. I owned the debt on Julian Shell Company. And most importantly, I held the deed to my father megachurch. I drove home and changed into a pair of comfortable leggings and a faded college t-shirt, playing the role of the exhausted, unremarkable wife. I was sitting on the couch watching a cooking show when the front door unlocked. Marcus walked in, dropping his heavy leather duffel bag in the entryway. He looked perfectly disheveled, playing the part of the weary businessman returning from a grueling trip. He walked over to the couch, leaned down, and kissed me deeply on the lips. I kissed him back, tasting the lingering scent of mint and deceit. Baby Chicago was a nightmare. He groaned, unbuttoning his collar and collapsing next to me. "I had to fight tooth and nail to save that zoning deal, but your husband pulled it off. I saved the brokerage." "I am so proud of you, Marcus," I said, resting my head against his chest. I tracked the GPS tag on my laptop. He had spent the last 3 days less than 4 miles away, sleeping in my sister bed, plotting to steal millions and leave me with nothing. Marcus wrapped his arm around my shoulder, his voice shifting into a tone of breathless excitement. "But I have some amazing news to make up for my absence. Your parents just finalized the details for a massive televised charity gala this weekend at the church. They are inviting all the top politicians and business leaders in Atlanta. And I talked to your father about doing something incredibly special." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold embossed envelope. He handed it to me with a beaming, loving smile. I want to surprise everyone, Marcus said, looking deep into my eyes. Right in the middle of the gala, in front of 3,000 people and the live broadcast cameras, I am going to call you up on stage. We are going to renew our vows, Naomi. I want the whole world to see our unbreakable bond. I want to lock us in forever. I stared at the gilded invitation in my hands. He wanted to parade me on stage to solidify his image as the perfect family man right before he pulled the trigger on his embezzlement scheme. He wanted to humiliate me on live television, tying me to his fake legacy, while his real divorce papers sat in a court registry. I looked up at my husband, smiling so widely my cheeks hurt. It sounds absolutely perfect, Marcus. I cannot wait for the whole world to see exactly who we are. The morning after Marcus handed me that gilded invitation, my mother summoned me to an exclusive bridal and evening wear boutique in Buckhead. It was time for the gala fittings. The boutique smelled of fresh roses and expensive champagne, a pristine environment designed for women who never had to check a price tag. Camille stood on the center pedestal surrounded by 3 fawning attendants. She was wrapped in a custom silk maternity gown that hugged her growing belly perfectly. The fabric caught the light, making her look radiant and untouchable. My mother, First Lady. Patricia stood back with her hands clasped together, wiping a completely fabricated tear from her eye. "You look like absolute royalty, Camille," my mother cooed, her voice echoing through the quiet shop. "You are bringing a new blessing into this family, and you deserve to shine tonight." Then my mother turned to me. The warmth vanished from her face, instantly replaced by the familiar look of irritation she had worn whenever she looked at me since I was a teenager. She snatched a heavy mustard yellow taffeta dress from a nearby rack and shoved it into my arms. It had a high, suffocating neckline, rigid boning, and puffy sleeves that looked like they belonged in a 19th century stage play. "Put this on," my mother ordered sharply. "It is modest and practical. We cannot have you distracting the congregation from your sister's pregnancy glow tonight. Besides, Marcus prefers a wife who knows how to blend into the background. A loud woman is an ugly woman, Naomi." I stepped out of the dressing room a few minutes later wearing the mustard monstrosity. The stiff fabric scratched against my skin and the color completely washed me out. Camille laughed out loud from her pedestal, resting both hands protectively over her stomach. "Oh, Naomi, it really suits you," she giggled. "It hides your midsection perfectly. Not that you have a baby bump to hide, unfortunately. I know Marcus has been so stressed about your fertility issues lately. A man like him needs a real family to come home to. It is a good thing he has Julian and me to bring some life into this household." I looked at my sister. She was stroking a belly that held my husband's child, wearing a diamond bracelet bought with stolen church funds and actively plotting to steal my inheritance. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream. I just looked in the mirror, adjusted the hideous collar of my dress, and met her gaze. "You are right, Camille," I said softly. "This dress is exactly what I need to wear tonight. I would not want to steal your spotlight before the main event." Later that afternoon, the entire family relocated to the church sanctuary to oversee the final gala preparations. The massive auditorium was swarming with florists, lighting technicians, and caterers setting up tables across the polished floors. My father was holding court near the altar, introducing Julian to the senior board of elders. Julian stood there in his custom-tailored Italian suit, soaking up their absolute adoration. He was shaking hands, flashing his brilliant white smile, and accepting endless praise for his supposed financial genius. The church elders practically bowed to him, thanking him for miraculously doubling the building fund through his tech investments. They worshipped his perceived wealth and proximity to power. I sat quietly in the second pew, hiding behind my open laptop. My mother had instructed me to manage the seating chart and ensure all the VIP donors were placed correctly. But I was doing something entirely different. Through the secure access I had established on the hard drive, I cloned from Marcus. I was watching the live banking portal for Julian's shell company. The screen refreshed. A new transaction appeared in the queue. Julian had just initiated an encrypted wire transfer from his phone while shaking hands with the head deacon. He was moving $2.5 million. It was the absolute last drop of the church's emergency reserve fund. I traced the routing numbers in real time as the money bypassed the church operational accounts, washed briefly through Julian's Delaware Corporation, and landed directly in a Cayman Islands offshore account registered exclusively to Marcus. They were emptying the vault just hours before the gala began. They planned to take the stage tonight, accept the applause of 3,000 people, renew my fake vows, and vanish by Monday morning. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the completed transfer and locked my screen just as a shadow fell over my keyboard. I looked up to see Sister Washington, the church's head treasurer. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her late 60s who had served our congregation with unwavering dedication for 3 decades. She looked absolutely terrified, clutching a stack of manila folders tightly to her chest. She glanced nervously around the sanctuary to make sure my parents were out of earshot before leaning down to whisper to me, "Naomi." Sister Washington breathed, her voice trembling with panic. "I know your father told me to hand over the master ledgers to Julian last month, but I was reviewing the quarterly statements this morning. The numbers do not make any sense. The expansion accounts are completely empty. I tried to ask your mother about the discrepancies, but she dismissed me and told me I was overstepping. Something is terribly wrong with the building fund." I opened my mouth to tell her she was absolutely right. I wanted to assure her that I already had the evidence secured and that the congregation's money would be recovered. But before a single word could leave my lips, a heavy hand slammed down onto my laptop screen, snapping it shut with a violent, echoing crack. I flinched, looking up into Julian's cold, arrogant face. He stepped deliberately between Sister Washington and me, using his height to physically intimidate us both. "Sister Washington," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I believe the pastor asked you to assist with the floral arrangements in the lobby. The finances are fully under control. I do not need you confusing yourself with complex investment strategies." He waited until the older woman hurried away, visibly shaken and clutching her folders. Then Julian leaned down, placing both hands on the pew, trapping me in my seat. He lowered his face until he was inches from mine, his eyes narrowing into a menacing glare. "Listen to me very carefully, Naomi," he whispered harshly. "You are just a mediocre government bean counter. Do not try to look at things you cannot comprehend. You stick to the seating charts, you wear your ugly little dress, and you stay out of big boy business. Do you understand me?" I looked up at the man who was currently bankrupt, utterly dependent on my stolen money, and completely unaware that I now owned every single commercial debt his name was attached to. I smiled sweetly, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "Loud and clear, Julian," I replied. "I will leave the big boy business exactly where it belongs." I watched Julian stride back toward the altar, his chest puffed out like a peacock. He thought he had successfully intimidated me. He had no idea he was walking straight into an absolute financial slaughterhouse. Before I could even pack my laptop into my bag, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Deacon Hayes, my father's right-hand man. He told me the pastor needed to see me in his private suite immediately. I followed him down the carpeted hallway behind the main sanctuary. The air grew colder the further we walked away from the gala preparations. When I stepped into my father's lavish pastoral office, the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me. I was not alone. My father stood behind his massive desk, his face contorted with rage. Julian was leaning against the mahogany bookshelf, arms crossed, looking incredibly smug. Marcus stood near the window, pacing with a perfectly manufactured look of deep concern. My father did not offer a greeting. He slammed a thick legal document onto his desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Read it," he barked. I stepped forward and glanced at the paper. It was a sworn affidavit. According to the document, I was taking full legal and financial responsibility for a massive clerical error that had supposedly misplaced $5 million of the church expansion fund. The affidavit explicitly stated that Julian's tech company was completely blameless, and that my gross incompetence as a government accountant had caused the funds to be frozen in a digital void. I looked up at the 3 men. Julian let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "You really messed up this time, Naomi," Julian said, shaking his head. I trusted you to help audit the transfer protocols, but you clearly do not understand how high-level corporate acquisitions work. Now my Silicon Valley investors are breathing down my neck and the church accounts are locked. You put my entire reputation on the line because you were too proud to ask for help. The absolute audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Julian had just wired that exact money into Marcus's offshore account 20 minutes ago. But instead of running, they needed a fall guy to delay the federal authorities when the money officially vanished on Monday morning. They needed a scapegoat. They needed me. Dad, I said, keeping my voice remarkably calm. You cannot possibly believe this. I never touched those transfer protocols. You gave Julian the power of attorney, not me. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. Do not you dare lie to me in the house of the Lord, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. Julian showed me the digital access logs. Your signature credentials were used. You have always been jealous of your sister's success. You have always resented Julian for providing the generational wealth you could never achieve. And now your petty jealousy has jeopardized my entire ministry. You will sign this document right now. You will take the blame for this clerical error, so Julian can legally clear his company name and recover the funds. If you refuse, I will personally call the police and have you arrested for embezzlement. I turned to look at my husband, the man I had shared a bed with for a decade, the man who had secretly divorced me to protect his own skin. Marcus walked over and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, playing the role of the devoted, heartbroken husband. Baby, just sign it, Marcus whispered, pressing a kiss to my temple. It is just a formality to keep the board of elders off Julian's back. I know you made a mistake, but I am not going to let you go to prison. I will hire you the best defense lawyers in Atlanta. We will fight the negligence charges together. Just do it for the family. We have to protect the family name. I stared at the affidavit. They really thought I was stupid. They thought they could drain the church dry pin the federal crime on me and fly off to the Cayman Islands, while I rotted in a federal penitentiary facing decades behind bars. My entire life I had been the designated punching bag for this family. When Camille stole, I took the blame. When my parents needed a villain to make their golden child look better, I played the part. Now, they were asking me to sacrifice my freedom to finance their criminal escape. I reached into my purse. I did not pull out a tissue to cry. I pulled out my sleek silver disappearing ink pen. You are right, Marcus, I said softly, looking deep into his lying eyes. We have to protect the family. I leaned over my father's desk and pressed the pen firmly against the paper. I signed my name in bold, sweeping letters on the signature line. The bright blue ink looked incredibly official. It would completely vanish into thin air in exactly 48 hours, leaving them with a blank, useless piece of paper right when the FBI came knocking. I handed the document to my father. He snatched it away without a word of thanks, sliding it into a secure folder. Julian smirked, clearly thrilled that his trap had worked so flawlessly. Now wipe that sour look off your face, my father commanded, straightening his tailored suit jacket. The gala is starting. Go out there and stand quietly. Do not embarrass us tonight. I walked out of the pastoral suite, my heart beating in a steady, victorious rhythm. The lobby was already buzzing with Atlanta elite. Photographers flashed their cameras as politicians and wealthy donors mingled under the vaulted ceilings. I took my place near the entrance, blending into the background in my hideous mustard yellow dress. Marcus jogged up to me a few minutes later, his face flushed with excitement. The orchestra was beginning to play the opening chords for the evening program. It is almost time, baby, Marcus said, slipping his hand into his tailored jacket. He pulled out a beautifully crafted gold-embossed certificate featuring elegant calligraphy. We are going up on stage right after the opening prayer. The pastor is going to hand us this certificate of renewed vows for the cameras. I want you to hold it up high so everyone can see our commitment. He handed the heavy parchment to me. I looked down at the beautiful sweeping letters, but my forensic training kicked in instantly. The calligraphy was just a distraction, hidden perfectly within the decorative borders, and the flowing script was dense, microscopic legal jargon. I ran my thumb over the text. This was not a romantic certificate of renewed vows. It was a binding arbitration agreement, By holding this up and publicly accepting it on camera, Marcus was trying to trick me into legally waiving my rights to ever sue him for financial fraud, hidden assets, or emotional distress. He was locking all the doors before he set the house on fire. The heavy wooden doors to the main sanctuary swung open. The grand organ music swelled, shaking the floorboards beneath my feet. Marcus smiled at me, completely unaware that he had just handed a loaded gun to the woman who was about to execute him in front of 3,000 people. The flash of a dozen professional camera lenses blinded me the second we crossed the threshold. The church atrium had been transformed into an obscenely lavish red carpet event. This was not a space for spiritual reflection. This was a runway for Atlanta's elite. Crystal champagne flutes, clinked silk gowns brushed against imported marble floors, and local news anchors stood ready with their microphones. My parents were in their element, soaking up the flashing lights like plants absorbing the sun. My mother, First Lady. Patricia immediately shoved her way to the center of the step and repeat banner. The massive church logo loomed behind her. She grabbed Camille by the arm, pulling her younger daughter into the direct line of the cameras. Camille practically glowed in her custom maternity gown, posing perfectly as Julian wrapped a proprietary arm around her waist. I stood a few feet away, clutching the gilded arbitration agreement Marcus had just handed me. In my mustard yellow taffeta dress, I looked exactly how my mother wanted me to look, like the unfortunate frumpy backdrop to her beautiful, successful family. "Get in the picture, Marcus," my mother ordered, waving him over with a manicured hand covered in diamonds. "We need the men of the family flanking the women. It projects strength." Marcus eagerly jogged over, slipping into the frame right next to my father. I took a step forward to join my own family portrait. Before my foot could even touch the red carpet, my mother shot out her hand and pressed it flat against my chest, stopping me cold. "Not you, Naomi," she hissed under her breath, her brilliant camera-ready smile never wavering. "Your dress is clashing with the floral arrangements. You are throwing off the entire aesthetic of the shot. Just step to the side. I will have the photographer crop you out later anyway." The sheer disrespect was staggering, but I simply nodded and took 2 steps back into the shadows. I watched as my family posed a perfect picture of wealth, faith, and utter moral bankruptcy. A reporter from a prominent Atlanta lifestyle magazine stepped up, thrusting a microphone toward my father. Pastor Joseph, the reporter, beamed. "The new youth center expansion is the talk of the city. How does it feel to spearhead such a monumental project?" My father puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pious. "It is not me," he projected loudly, ensuring every church elder in the lobby heard him. "It is the Lord working through my incredible family. Specifically, my brilliant son-in-law Julian here. Julian Tech Investments and Financial Stewardship have doubled our building fund. He is a true visionary." Julian leaned into the microphone, flashing his pristine white smile. He looked exactly like the savior my parents desperately wanted him to be. "It is an honor to serve this community," Julian said smoothly. "Giving back is the cornerstone of my corporate philosophy. But my greatest achievement is standing right next to me." He placed his hand dramatically over Camille's stomach. "My beautiful wife is carrying our first child," Julian announced. "The next generation of our legacy." The crowd of onlookers let out a collective fawning gasp. Church board members clapped enthusiastically. Camille batted her eyelashes, looking down at her bump with feigned humility. I stood in the corner staring at the man claiming a child that was actually the product of his affair with his brother-in-law's wife. The tangled web of their degeneracy was almost poetic. Julian caught me staring. Emboldened by the cameras and the adoration of the crowd, he decided he needed to put the frumpy outcast sister in her place. He grabbed the microphone again and pointed directly at me. "And we cannot forget about my sister-in-law, Naomi," Julian called out. His voice echoed through the massive atrium. Every single head turned to look at me, standing awkwardly in my yellow dress. I know she has been struggling lately with some severe depression and professional setbacks. In fact, to celebrate the church's success tonight, I would like to publicly offer to pay for Naomi to take a nice budget vacation. Maybe a quiet weekend at a discount motel down in Florida to help her clear her head and cure that depression. The insult was perfectly engineered. It painted him as a benevolent billionaire while publicly humiliating me as a charity case. A few of the wealthy church elders chuckled awkwardly. My mother covered her mouth, hiding a delighted smirk. Marcus looked down at his shoes, playing the part of the humiliated husband who was too embarrassed to defend his crazy wife. I did not shrink away. I did not cry. I gripped my silver disappearing ink pen in my pocket, feeling the cold metal against my palm. I stepped forward, walking directly onto the edge of the red carpet. The cameras swiveled toward me. "That is incredibly generous of you, Julian," I said. My voice was completely calm, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a surgical scalpel. I projected my voice clearly, ensuring every single reporter caught my words. "But you really should save your pennies. You are going to need every last one of them for your legal fees." The laughter in the atrium died instantly. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. My mother's eyes widened in horror. Pastor Joseph opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Julian's smile faltered, the corners of his mouth twitching as he tried to maintain his arrogant facade. "What did you just say to me?" he demanded, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper as he took a step toward me. Before he could intimidate me further, a sharp, piercing chime echoed from his tuxedo pocket, then another chime, and another. Julian stopped dead in his tracks. He pulled his latest model smartphone from his pocket. The screen was lighting up with a barrage of urgent, high-priority notifications. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched the exact moment his world ended. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a designer's suit. His mouth fell open. His hand began to shake violently. The notifications were automated alerts from his primary commercial banking institution, the same institution where I had just purchased all of his toxic debt just a few hours prior. His shell company accounts had been completely frozen. His personal lines of credit had been instantly revoked. A massive, insurmountable freeze had been placed on every single financial asset attached to his name by a newly registered anonymous creditor known only as EV Holdings. Julian was completely cut off from the stolen church money he had just transferred. He was effectively locked out of his own life. Julian looked up from his phone, panic radiating from his eyes. He looked wildly around the room, breathing heavily, completely ignoring the reporters asking him if he was all right. He looked at Marcus, who was still grinning for the cameras. And then he looked at me. I smiled at him. A slow, chilling smile. I tapped the gilded arbitration certificate Marcus had given me against my leg, turned on my heel, and walked straight through the massive oak doors into the main sanctuary. The show was just getting started. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the sprawling main sanctuary. The sheer scale of the room was staggering, a massive architectural testament to my parents' influence and the congregation's money. 3,000 people sat in curved velvet-lined pews, dressed in their absolute best evening wear. Theatrical lighting swept across the stage, casting a warm, dramatic glow over the massive gold cross suspended above the altar. I kept my head down, playing the part of the timid, supportive wife, and took my assigned seat in the front row next to my mother. My mother shot me a warning glare, her eyes darting to the hideous mustard-yellow dress she had forced me to wear. She leaned over, her voice a sharp hiss, disguised beneath a frozen camera-ready smile. "Sit up straight, Naomi, and try to look grateful when your husband calls you up there. He is doing you a massive favor tonight." I did not reply. I simply folded my hands in my lap, feeling the cold, hard edges of the gilded arbitration certificate Marcus had given me. My father, Pastor Joseph, stepped up to the crystal podium. The crowd erupted into rapturous applause. He raised his hands, basking in their adoration, before signaling for silence. "Welcome, my brothers and sisters!" My father's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing perfectly off the vaulted ceilings. "Tonight, we celebrate the incredible financial blessings the Lord has poured over this expansion project. But a church is not just built on bricks and mortar. It is built on the foundation of family. It is built on holy, unbreakable covenants. And tonight, we have the profound privilege of witnessing a testament to that unbreakable love. I would like to call my son-in-law Marcus and my daughter Naomi to the stage." The congregation burst into applause again. Marcus stood up from the pew across the aisle, buttoning his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket. He walked over to me, offering his hand with a dazzling smile. I placed my hand in his. His palm was slightly sweaty. We walked up the carpeted steps to the altar together, standing dead center under the blinding stage lights. My father handed Marcus a silver microphone and stepped back, allowing us to take the center spotlight. Marcus turned to face me. He looked out at the sea of 3,000 faces, then looked deeply into my eyes. His performance was absolutely flawless. He had clearly rehearsed this monologue for weeks. "My beautiful Naomi," Marcus began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "10 years ago, I made a promise to protect you, to honor you, and to guide our family through whatever storms came our way. And let us be honest, we have faced our share of storms." He paused, letting a heavy, dramatic silence wash over the crowd. I noticed several women in the front rows wiping tears from their eyes. Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave to sound even more vulnerable. "Everyone knows that the past few years have been incredibly difficult for you. You have battled severe depression. You have struggled with the heavy burden of professional setbacks. There were days when it was hard for you to even get out of bed. But through all the darkness, through all your struggles, my love for you never wavered. I carried the weight for both of us because that is what a real man does. I promised God I would be your rock, and I meant it." The congregation murmured in collective sympathy and admiration. He was painting himself as the ultimate savior, the long-suffering martyr shackled to a broken, incompetent woman. He was laying the groundwork to ensure that when the federal authorities started asking questions about the missing church funds on Monday, everyone would easily believe that the crazy, depressed accountant wife was entirely to blame. Marcus dropped to one knee right there on the altar. The crowd let out a massive, echoing gasp of delight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gilded arbitration agreement, holding it up like a sacred covenant. "Naomi, I do not just want to be your husband," Marcus declared loudly. "I want to renew our vows right here, right now, in front of our community. I want to legally and spiritually bind us together for the rest of our lives. Take this certificate, take my hand, and promise you will stand by me forever." He held the microphone out to me. The entire sanctuary was holding its breath. Thousands of eyes were pinned directly on me, waiting for me to cry, to break down in tears of gratitude, and to sign my life away. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. The cool metal felt heavy. I looked down at Marcus, still kneeling on the polished floor. I looked past him to the front pew, where my sister Camille was rubbing her pregnant belly, and my mother was beaming with vicious pride. I raised the microphone to my mouth. I did not cry. My voice did not shake. "Marcus," I said, my voice echoing crystal clear through the massive auditorium, "that was a beautiful speech. But I have one simple question for you." I paused, letting the silence stretch out for 3 agonizing seconds. "How exactly do we renew our vows when the state of Georgia confirms you forged my signature to divorce me 2 months ago?" The silence that slammed into that room was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the building. 3,000 people sat completely paralyzed. No one breathed. No one moved. Marcus stared up at me, his charming smile freezing, then cracking, then completely shattering. The color drained from his face at a terrifying speed, leaving him looking like a panicked corpse. He realized in that exact fraction of a second that I knew everything. Gasps began to ripple through the front pews, quickly escalating into a wave of shocked whispers that swept across the entire mega church. Marcus scrambled to his feet, panic completely overriding his polished facade. He lunged forward, trying to violently snatch the microphone out of my hand. "Give me that!" he hissed, his eyes wide and wild. He turned to the congregation, waving his hands frantically. "Do not listen to her," Marcus yelled over the rising murmur of the crowd. "She is having an episode. Her depression is making her hallucinate. She is having a complete psychotic break. Someone call a doctor." Before I could take a step back, the sound of high heels clicking rapidly up the wooden stage stairs caught my attention. My mother, First Lady. Patricia had bolted from the front pew. Her face was contorted with absolute unhinged fury. She stormed across the altar, entirely abandoning her poised, graceful persona. "You ungrateful, hysterical child!" my mother screamed, her voice carrying without a microphone. She drew her arm back and delivered a vicious, stinging slap across my cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the sanctuary, silencing the whispers instantly. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. The entire congregation gasped in horror as their beloved First Lady physically assaulted her own daughter on the holy altar. I slowly turned my face back to look at my mother. My cheek was burning, but I did not raise a hand to touch it. I just smiled. The trap had perfectly clamped shut. None of them realized that the real destruction had not even started yet. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers toward the audiovisual booth at the back of the room. The show was officially out of their control. The sting on my cheek from my mother's hand was a minor inconvenience compared to the absolute devastation I was about to unleash. I lowered my hand after snapping my fingers. High up in the audio-visual booth, the lead technician, a brilliant college student whose student loans I had quietly paid off yesterday, hit the execute button. The massive high-definition jumbotron suspended above the altar flickered. The familiar gold and purple logo of my father's megachurch vanished. In its place, the harsh, unforgiving glare of unredacted financial documents illuminated the sanctuary. A collective murmur rippled through the 3,000 congregants. They squinted at the giant screens, trying to understand why bank statements were being projected during a vow renewal. But it did not take long for the numbers to tell the story. I had designed the presentation for maximum impact. I highlighted the key transactions in bright, impossible-to-miss crimson boxes. "Look at the screens," I commanded, my voice projecting clearly through the microphone I still held tight in my grip. "Look at where your hard-earned tithes have been going. Look at the youth center expansion fund you all sacrificed to build." The first document expanded on the jumbotrons. It showed a direct wire transfer of $1.2 million leaving the church's primary building fund. The money did not go to a construction firm or an architectural group. It went directly into the Delaware-based shell company owned by Julian. A collective gasp echoed through the cavernous room. People began pointing at the screens, shifting in their pews, the polite confusion rapidly morphing into genuine outrage. My mother spun around to look at the screens. The blood completely drained from her face. She dropped her hand from where she had just struck me and stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the altar carpet. "Turn it off," my mother shrieked, waving her arms frantically at the AV booth. "Turn those screens off right now. This is a technical malfunction." But the screens did not go dark. The slideshow advanced to the next undeniable piece of evidence. The jumbotrons displayed a sequential trail of routing numbers showing the money bouncing from Julian's fake tech company straight into a Cayman Islands offshore account. I had made sure to blow up the name registered to that specific offshore account so every single person in the very back row could read it. The words flashed in massive block letters. Camille's legacy. The sanctuary erupted. The polite, wealthy congregation shattered into pure chaos. Deacons jumped out of their front row seats, shouting at the altar. Elderly women who had donated their fixed income pensions began crying and pointing accusingly at my family. The live stream cameras operated by the same heavily compensated AV technician were broadcasting every single second of this financial slaughter to the thousands of people watching at home. Julian stood frozen near the edge of the stage. His arrogant country club smirk had completely melted away, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man who realized he was going to federal prison. He whipped his head toward Marcus. The alliance of the two golden sons-in-law shattered in a fraction of a second. Julian lunged across the altar and violently shoved Marcus in the chest. Marcus stumbled backward, tripping over the microphone stand. "You told me you took care of the paper trail." Julian screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his custom tuxedo, shaking him furiously in front of the entire church. "You swore to me your stupid accountant wife had wiped the transaction logs. You said we were clear. You set me up to take the fall for this." Marcus shoved Julian back, his own panic making his voice pitch high and desperate. "I did not set you up. She is crazy. She hacked my computer. You are the one who initiated the final wire transfer tonight, Julian. Your digital signature is on the withdrawal. While the two men physically fought each other on the holy altar, blaming each other for the financial ruin they had built together, I turned to look at my father. Pastor Joseph was staring up at the jumbotrons. His chest was heaving. The empire he had spent 30 years building on the backs of his congregation, the empire he had protected by constantly sacrificing my mental health and my reputation, was evaporating in real time. He looked down at the furious crowd. His flock was turning into an angry mob. Deacons were rushing the stage steps demanding answers. My father clutched his chest. His knees buckled, and he collapsed heavily into the ornate velvet chair behind the pulpit. He was gasping for air, his face turning a dangerous shade of gray. But my mother did not run to her husband. First Lady Patricia did not check to see if the man she had been married to for 40 years was having a heart attack. She ran straight to the edge of the stage, screaming at the cameramen in the aisles. "Shut off the broadcast," she shrieked, swatting at a camera lens. "We are being hacked. This is a targeted attack on our ministry. Stop filming us." Camille, sitting in the front pew, burst into loud theatrical tears. She cradled her pregnant belly, looking around wildly for someone to pity her, to protect her. But the church elders who had fawned over her diamonds just an hour ago were now glaring at her with absolute disgust. They saw her name on that offshore account. They knew she was wearing their stolen money around her wrist. I stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos. My cheeks still throbbed, but I had never felt more powerful. I had dismantled their lies with absolute precision. There was no argument to be had, no gaslighting that could undo the math displayed above our heads. Numbers simply do not lie. Then the flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness outside. The reflection of the emergency lights bounced through the massive stained glass windows, painting the sanctuary walls in frantic, pulsing colors. The angry shouting of the congregation was suddenly drowned out by the deafening wail of multiple sirens, pulling up to the main entrance of the megachurch. The heavy carved wooden doors at the back of the sanctuary were kicked violently open. The loud crash echoed like a gunshot. A dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the FBI Financial Crimes Division marched in perfect unison down the center aisle. They did not pause. They did not hesitate. They were heading straight for the altar. The federal agents moved with terrifying efficiency. Their heavy tactical boots thudded against the plush sanctuary carpet, drowning out the frantic murmurs of the congregation. They did not stop to flash badges at the deacons or answer questions from the panicked church elders. They marched in a straight, unbroken line directly up the carpeted stairs to the altar. Marcus scrambled backward, his polished facade completely collapsing. He threw his hands up in the air, backing away from Julian, as if the white tech CEO was suddenly infectious. "I had nothing to do with this," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking in terror. "I am just a commercial real estate broker. I just signed the zoning paperwork. He is the one who took the church funds. Ask him." A tall, broad-shouldered agent with salt and pepper hair stepped onto the stage and grabbed Marcus roughly by the shoulder. "Marcus Vance, you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and federal identity theft," the agent barked, spinning Marcus around and slamming his chest against the crystal pulpit. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping around Marcus' wrists echoed through the microphone that was still resting on the stage floor. A few feet away, two other agents were backing Julian into the velvet choir chairs. Julian puffed out his chest, his face turning beet red with arrogant outrage. He tried to shove one of the federal agents away, a massive mistake that resulted in him being swiftly wrestled to the ground. "Get your hands off me," Julian roared, struggling against the agents as they pinned his arms behind his back. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my father is? I will have your badges for this. My family owns half the commercial real estate in Delaware. I will sue this entire department into the ground." Camille, who had been cowering in the front pew, suddenly found her voice. She hiked up her designer maternity dress and rushed the stage, inserting herself between the federal agents and her husband. She thrust her pregnant belly forward, using her unborn child as a physical shield. "Stop hurting him!" Camille shrieked hysterically, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You are making a huge mistake. My husband is a billionaire. He is the CEO of a major tech firm. He is going to buy this entire police department and fire all of you. Let him go right now." The lead agent, a no-nonsense woman who looked like she had zero patience for Atlanta socialites, stepped right up to Camille. She did not flinch at the screaming or the tears. "Ma'am, I suggest you step back before I arrest you for obstructing a federal investigation," the agent said, her voice dropping to a deadly icy calm. "And for the record, your husband is not a billionaire. Julian Shell Company accounts hold exactly $38.14. We spoke to his father in Delaware this morning. His father legally disowned him and cut off his trust fund 14 months ago due to a severe gambling addiction. Your husband is completely broke." The air rushed out of Camille's lungs. She stumbled backward, her hands dropping from her belly to her sides. She stared down at Julian, who was currently being hauled to his feet by the back of his expensive Italian suit. Julian refused to look at her. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, his face contorted in a grimace of pure humiliation. The generational wealth Camille had constantly weaponized against me, the status she had used to belittle my government job and my lifestyle, had never existed at all. She had married a con artist with empty pockets. Off to the side of the stage, my mother was losing her mind. First Lady Patricia was sprinting back and forth across the edge of the altar, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Shut off the cameras," my mother shrieked, swatting wildly at a paralyzed cameraman. "Confiscate their phones. Deacons, secure the doors. Nobody is allowed to record this. This is a private family matter." But it was entirely too late. I looked out into the sea of 3,000 congregants. Every single person in the first 20 rows had their smartphones out. They were recording the arrests from every possible angle. The live stream had never been cut. The high-definition bank statements were still glowing bright red on the jumbotrons above our heads, proving exactly where their hard-earned tithes had gone. My family's destruction was trending locally on every major social media platform before Marcus even made it out the front doors of the church. My father, Pastor Joseph, remained slumped in his ornate velvet chair. He was clutching his chest, staring blankly at the ceiling, completely unresponsive as federal agents marched his two golden sons-in-law down the center aisle in handcuffs. His entire empire, built on manipulation and stolen funds, had just been burned to the ground. I stood in the center of the wreckage. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly bent down, picked up my purse from the floor, and smoothed the wrinkles out of the hideous mustard-yellow taffeta dress my mother had forced me to wear. I adjusted my posture, keeping my spine perfectly straight, and walked down the steps of the stage. As I approached the center aisle, the angry, chaotic crowd of churchgoers immediately stopped shouting. They parted like the Red Sea, stepping back into their pews to give me a wide, unobstructed path. No one yelled at me. No one tried to touch me. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. I walked slowly and deliberately out of the sanctuary, leaving the flashing police lights and the screaming behind me. I stepped out into the cool Atlanta night, untouched and entirely victorious. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen island of the suburban house Marcus and I had shared, sipping a cup of black coffee. The house was dead quiet. I opened my encrypted laptop to review the morning financial reports. My private intelligence team had just sent me an urgent notification. My parents had not spent the night praying for their congregation. Instead, Pastor Joseph and Patricia had desperately scrambled to salvage their crumbling image. They had completely liquidated their last remaining personal assets, cashing out their private retirement accounts, taking massive penalties just to post the exorbitant federal bail bonds for Julian and Marcus. They had drained everything they had left to spring the two men from holding cells before sunrise. My phone vibrated on the counter. It was an alert from my home security system. I clicked the camera feed. Two luxury SUVs came screeching into my driveway, hopping the curb and tearing up the manicured grass. The car doors flew open. Marcus, Julian, Camille, and my parents spilled out onto my front lawn. They looked exhausted, disheveled, and absolutely rabid. They did not look like people coming to apologize or ask for mercy. They looked like cornered, desperate animals out for blood. I took a slow sip of my coffee, set the mug down, and walked to the front door to greet them. The pounding on the heavy oak door was so violent the glass panes rattled in their frames. I stood in the foyer, watching the brass handle jiggle frantically as Marcus tried to force his way inside. "Open this door right now, Naomi," Marcus roared, his voice muffled but aggressive through the thick wood. "We know you are in there. You are going to fix this audit today, or I swear to God I will drag you down to the federal building myself and make you confess to hacking the church accounts." I did not unlock the deadbolt. I simply stood there, listening to the absolute delusion of a man who had just spent the night in a federal holding cell. He genuinely believed he could still bully me into submission. Then came my mother's voice, shrill and dripping with the toxic entitlement she had wielded like a weapon my entire life. Patricia pounded her fists against the door, her expensive rings scratching the paint. "Naomi Vance, you open this door immediately. You have embarrassed this family for the absolute last time. I know exactly why you did this. You are so violently jealous of Camille's pregnancy that you fabricated those banking documents just to ruin her husband's reputation. You could not give Marcus a child, so you decided to destroy the father of Camille's baby. You are a bitter, barren woman who wants to destroy everyone else's happiness." My mother's gaslighting was almost poetic in its predictability. She was standing in my driveway, her son-in-law facing decades in federal prison for stealing from her own church, and her immediate instinct was to blame me for being jealous of the sister who was currently sleeping with my husband. They refused to accept that their golden world was built on lies. "You listen to me," Julian yelled, his voice carrying the arrogant, unearned confidence of a white man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire life. He kicked the bottom of the door. "My father's legal team is already drafting the defamation paperwork. We are suing you for every penny you have ever made. You illegally hacked a corporate database. My family practically owns the commercial sector in this state. You messed with the wrong bloodline. You are going to prison, Naomi. I will make sure you never work as an accountant again." Julian was completely unhinged. The FBI had literally handcuffed him on the altar 12 hours ago, and he still thought his disowned father's lawyers were coming to save him. He was clinging to the myth of his generational wealth because he had absolutely nothing else left. "You do not have a leg to stand on," Naomi Marcus yelled, chiming back in to support the man he had been fighting on the altar just last night. The desperation was forcing them to stick together against their common enemy. "And since you wanted to be so smart about pulling up public records, let me remind you of a few facts. We are legally divorced. That means you have absolutely no right to be in this house. My name is on the mortgage. This is my property. You are just a squatter now. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your bags and get off my property before I call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing." I smiled at the heavy wooden door. Marcus was trying to throw me out of the house he had financially ruined. He thought his name on the mortgage gave him the ultimate power over my housing. He had no idea what a mortgage actually meant when you stopped paying the bank. "Please," Naomi Camille whined, playing her favorite role as the eternal victim. Her voice was muffled and breathless, carrying through the mail slot. "I spent the whole night crying in a police station waiting room. My baby is under so much stress because of your lies. Just come out and sign a retraction. Julian will forgive you if you just fix the glitch in the system. We can still be a family." They were a pack of rabid dogs barking at a brick wall. They demanded I fix the audit. They demanded I retract the truth. They demanded I pack my bags and surrender my home. They still believed they were the predators and I was the prey. They thought my silence meant I was cowering in fear, frantically trying to figure out how to escape their wrath. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing down my comfortable college t-shirt. I gave a quick nod to the two massive men standing silently in the shadows of my hallway. They were elite private security contractors, heavily armed and highly trained, whom I had hired using my $85 million safety net. Standing right behind them was Attorney Sterling, holding his sleek leather briefcase, looking thoroughly amused by the circus happening on my lawn. It was time to introduce my family to their new reality. I reached out and unlocked the deadbolt. The heavy door swung open. Marcus immediately lunged forward, his face contorted with rage, ready to grab me by the arm and force me into submission. but he froze the instant he crossed the threshold. The two towering private security guards stepped seamlessly in front of me, crossing their arms. Their tactical vests and stern, unblinking expressions sent Marcus stumbling backward down the porch steps, nearly knocking my mother over in his clumsy retreat. Julian's mouth dropped open. Patricia gasped, clutching her designer purse to her chest, as if the security guards were going to rob her. Pastor Joseph, who had been lingering near the SUV looking exhausted and defeated, stopped in his tracks and stared at the armed men. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, trying to summon his booming pastoral authority, though his voice wavered slightly. "Call off these thugs, Naomi. We are your family. You do not need hired muscle to speak to your own parents and your husband." I stepped out from behind the wall of muscle, walking onto the front porch in the bright morning sunlight. I did not look like a terrified, apologetic daughter. I looked like a woman who owned the ground they were standing on. Attorney Sterling stepped up right beside me, opening his briefcase with practiced, methodical precision. He pulled out a thick, heavy stack of official legal documents printed on heavy cardstock and handed them directly to me. I looked down at the people who had used me, discarded me, and tried to frame me for their massive federal crimes. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or hurl insults. I simply held up the massive stack of foreclosure notices, the bright red default stamps glaring in the daylight, ready to deliver the final financial execution. I stepped forward, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the concrete of my front porch. The morning air was crisp, but the sweat beading on Marcus' forehead told an entirely different story. I peeled the top document from the heavy stack and slapped it directly against his chest. He fumbled to catch it, his eyes frantically scanning the bold red lettering printed across the top of the page. "You divorced me to protect your assets, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the manicured lawn so every single one of them could hear me. "You thought you were an absolute genius forging my signature 60 days ago to shield yourself from bankruptcy. You thought you could trap me with a fake vow renewal, but you forgot one tiny crucial detail while you were busy playing the mastermind. You forgot to pay your commercial loans." Marcus stared at the thick legal paper, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. "This is a formal notice of default," he stammered, looking up at me in sheer disbelief. "It says the debt was completely purchased by a private equity firm, EV Holdings. Who are they, Naomi? Why do you have these documents?" I smiled, savoring the absolute, unadulterated bewilderment on his face. I reached into my stack and handed the next document to Julian. He snatched it away with trembling hands, his arrogant demeanor already starting to crack under the pressure. "EV Holdings is an anonymous private wealth entity," I explained, pacing slowly and deliberately across the porch. "A company designed specifically to acquire toxic commercial debt. It stands for Evelyn Vance Holdings. My middle name and your last name, Marcus. I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of the firm that just bought your entire life." Julian dropped the paper onto the driveway. His pristine country club posture completely crumbled. He had spent years coasting on the unearned privilege of his skin color and his father's last name, assuming he would always be the smartest person in any room. Now he was just another broke criminal facing federal indictment. "That is mathematically impossible," Julian gasped, his voice cracking as his privilege collided with harsh reality. "You are a low-level government auditor. You drive a 5-year-old sedan. You do not have the capital to buy out a $4 million commercial loan portfolio. My father's hedge fund could not even secure that kind of liquidity overnight without a board vote. There is no way you have that money." "You are absolutely right, Julian," I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. "My government salary could never cover your massive, catastrophic failures, but my inheritance absolutely could." My mother gasped loudly, clutching my father's arm as if she needed physical support to stay upright. My mother's perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure horror. All the years she had spent polishing her image as the flawless First Lady were being dismantled by the daughter she had deemed worthless. "Inheritance," Patricia demanded, her voice shrill with sudden greed and panic. "What inheritance, Naomi? What are you talking about?" "Great Aunt Beatrice left me everything," I announced. I watched the blood completely drain from my parents' faces. Beatrice was the only person who saw exactly who you people were. She despised your shallow obsession with designer clothes and church donations. She bypassed your precious megachurch entirely and left her entire $85 million estate directly to me. And because Marcus was so incredibly desperate to divorce me behind my back to protect his failing brokerage, he legally forfeited any marital claim to a single cent of it. His betrayal literally funded his own execution. The reality of my financial dominance slammed into them like a runaway freight train. I turned to my brother-in-law. The man who had mocked my lifestyle, insulted my car, and sneered at my career just 24 hours ago. I do not just own the debt on your fake tech company, Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy calm. I am the ruthless corporate raider who froze your shell accounts last night. I am the reason your credit cards are declining right now. I own you. I turned back to the man I used to call my husband. I own the mortgage on this house, Marcus. You are currently trespassing on my private property. Finally, I looked directly at my father. Pastor Joseph was leaning heavily against the hood of his luxury SUV. He was clutching his chest, struggling to breathe as if he were having a genuine heart attack. And Dad, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. You put up the holy sanctuary as collateral for Julian loans because you wanted to brag about your wealthy son-in-law. I bought those loans too. I hold the deed to your megachurch. I own the altar where you let them arrest my husband. I own the very floorboards you preach on. The absolute magnitude of their defeat shattered them completely. Julian took a stumbling step backward, grabbing his hair in manic frustration. He realized his entire fraudulent life was over. He was completely broke, legally exposed to federal charges, and entirely at the mercy of the black sister-in-law he had treated like absolute dirt. Marcus let out a guttural, desperate sound. The charming, arrogant broker vanished completely. He dropped to his knees right there on the hard, concrete driveway. He crawled forward, ignoring the private security guards, whose hands instinctively went to their holsters. "Naomi, please," Marcus begged, tears streaming down his face, as he reached out and grabbed the hem of my jeans. I was wrong. I was terrified of going broke. I was trying to protect you from the financial fallout. You know I love you, baby. We can fix this. You have the money now. We can pay off the federal authorities and make this all go away. Just give me another chance. Do not take the house. Do not leave me with nothing. I looked down at him with absolute, unfiltered disgust. Before I could even order my security team to drag him off my property, a frantic blur of expensive designer fabric pushed past Julian and my stunned parents. Camille shoved her way to the front of the group, her face completely streaked with ruined mascara and blind panic. She did not yell at me. She did not throw another petty insult about my appearance or my fertility. Instead, the untouchable golden child of the family threw herself onto the concrete right next to Marcus. She fell to her knees at my feet, grabbing my other hand, completely abandoning any shred of dignity she had left. "Please, Naomi," Camille sobbed hysterically, burying her tear-stained face against my knees. "I am carrying Marcus' baby. I know we hurt you, but you cannot do this. Do not put your own nephew on the street." The entire front yard went dead silent. The only sound was the rustling of the wind through the oak trees lining my driveway, and the pathetic, ragged sobs tearing from my sister's throat. She was gripping my jeans, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the denim as she wept. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. The sister who had framed me for theft, mocked my fertility, and slept with my husband was now begging for her life on the concrete. Behind her, Julian froze. The color drained from his face for the second time that morning. He stared at his wife groveling on the ground, but his eyes were fixed on the words she had just screamed. "Marcus, baby," Julian repeated. His voice cracked, stripping away every ounce of his arrogant country club superiority. He looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. "What do you mean you are carrying Marcus' baby?" Marcus looked up from the driveway. He was still kneeling, completely defeated by my financial takeover, but a twisted, malicious smirk slowly began to form on his lips. Even in the face of federal prison and absolute bankruptcy, his bruised ego could not resist a moment of triumph over Julian. Marcus thought this was his ultimate trump card. He thought proving he had conquered Julian's beautiful golden wife would somehow salvage his manhood. "She is carrying my son, Julian." Marcus spat, his voice dripping with venomous pride. "We have been together for almost a year. We planned this. We were going to take the church expansion money and start a new life together in the Cayman Islands. Your perfect little wife hates you. She was just using you for your fake generational wealth, and the second she found out your father cut you off, she came running straight to my bed." Julian stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if he had been shot. My parents, Pastor Joseph and First Lady Patricia, looked like they were going to vomit. The perfect, pristine image they had worshipped was violently disintegrating right in front of them. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between the two men her daughter had been sleeping with. My father gripped the hood of his luxury SUV, breathing heavily, unable to comprehend the absolute degeneracy of his favorite child. But I was not finished. I refused to let Marcus hold on to even a single shred of pride. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I had taken it directly from the desk in the luxury high-rise condo Marcus had rented under my name. I held it up in the bright morning sunlight. "You really think you are a mastermind, Marcus?" I said, my voice cutting through the thick, tense air. "You think you stole Julian's wife and orchestrated the perfect escape? But you are just as stupid and gullible as he is." Marcus frowned, his smirk faltering. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I looked down at Camille, who was still kneeling at my feet. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the manila folder in my hand, her eyes wide with a new, distinct kind of terror. She knew exactly what I was holding. "You played everyone, Camille," I said softly, making sure my voice carried to every single person in the driveway. "You played our parents to get their approval. You played Julian for his fake tech money. And you played Marcus to get your hands on the millions he was embezzling from the church. You slept with my husband because he had the direct access to the accounts you wanted to drain. But you were so incredibly greedy you made one massive catastrophic mistake. You did not even check the DNA." I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of official medical paper. It was a prenatal genetic testing report from an exclusive private clinic in Buckhead. I had found it hidden in the bottom drawer of the condo office desk, tucked away where Marcus would never think to look. Camille scrambled to her feet, lunging toward me to grab the paper. "Do not show them that," she shrieked, her voice shrill with absolute panic. "Naomi, please do not do this." My private security guard stepped forward instantly, blocking her path and forcing her back. I held the paper out, letting the morning breeze catch the edge of it. I dropped the DNA test right onto the concrete driveway between Marcus and Julian. "The baby is not yours, Marcus," I announced. I watched his eyes lock onto the paper on the ground. "It is Julian's child. Camille was never going to run away with you. She was going to let you transfer the stolen church funds into the offshore account, and then she was going to drain that account, take her husband, and leave you holding the bag for the FBI. She set you up to take the fall for the entire federal fraud investigation while she lived in luxury with the man she actually wanted." The revelation hit the driveway like a live grenade. Marcus stared at the medical report lying on the concrete. The words confirming Julian's paternity were highlighted in bold black ink. The realization of his absolute foolishness washed over him in waves. He had divorced his wife, committed multiple federal felonies, ruined his career, and risked decades in prison for a woman who was actively planning to rob him blind and leave him to rot. He was not the criminal mastermind. He was the disposable pawn. Camille backed away slowly, shaking her head. "Marcus, wait," she stammered, raising her hands defensively. "It is not what it looks like. I can explain." But Marcus was not listening to her. His eyes slowly shifted from the DNA test on the ground to Julian, who was standing a few feet away, equally stunned by the revelation. Julian looked at the paper, then looked at Marcus, a bizarre mix of relief and pure rage flashing across his face. "You stupid, arrogant fool!" Julian sneered at Marcus, his ego suddenly inflating again. "You actually thought my wife would leave me for a bankrupt, bottom-feeding real estate broker like you. You were nothing but her wallet. That was the exact wrong thing to say to a man who had just lost absolutely everything. Marcus let out a primal, deafening roar. All the stress, the fear of federal prison, the financial ruin, and the ultimate humiliation of being played by my sister completely snapped his sanity. He did not say another word. He lunged forward, launching his entire body weight across the manicured lawn. Marcus tackled Julian right there in the middle of my driveway. The impact sent both men crashing hard into the side of my father's luxury SUV. The heavy thud of bone against metal echoed through the yard. Julian let out a sharp cry of pain as Marcus drove a heavy fist directly into his jaw. The satisfying crack of cartilage breaking made my mother scream in absolute horror. They rolled onto the grass, tearing up the pristine landscaping I had paid for. They were no longer the polished, elite businessmen of the Atlanta mega-church scene. They were two desperate, broken criminals fighting like rabid dogs over the wreckage of their own pathetic lives. Julian scrambled to get the upper hand, throwing a blind punch that caught Marcus in the eye, but Marcus was fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. He grabbed Julian by the collar of his expensive suit and slammed his head back into the lawn. My father, Pastor Joseph, stumbled forward, raising his hands in a futile attempt to stop the violence. "In the name of God, stop this immediately," my father bellowed, his pastoral authority completely useless against their fury. "You are destroying this family." But neither man listened. They just kept swinging, destroying each other right at my feet, exactly as they deserved. I watched the two men tear into each other with the feral desperation of rats fighting over a sinking ship. Julian threw a wild, uncoordinated punch that grazed Marcus on the cheekbone, but Marcus was completely unhinged by the revelation of Camille's ultimate betrayal. He pinned Julian down against the shattered headlight of my father's luxury SUV, bringing his fist down hard on Julian's perfectly sculpted nose. Blood sprayed across the pristine white collar of Julian's custom-tailored shirt. The arrogant tech CEO was screeching, trying to scramble backward on the concrete, his loafers scraping frantically against the pavement. Marcus grabbed him by the lapels, lifting him halfway up, just to slam him back down onto the driveway. The sickening thud echoed through the morning air. These were the men my family had worshipped. These were the providers, the visionaries, the supposed pillars of our community. Now they were nothing but bleeding broke felons rolling around in the dirt, entirely stripped of the arrogant armor they had worn for years. "Do something, Joseph!" My mother shrieked, her voice cracking as she yanked violently on my father's jacket sleeve. "They are going to kill each other right here in the driveway. Separate them. Call the police." But Pastor Joseph did not move a single muscle to stop the bloodshed. He looked down at the two men bleeding on the concrete, but his eyes were completely hollow. He was not mourning his son-in-law. He was mourning his empire. The massive church he had built, the million-dollar expansion funds, the local television broadcasts, the unquestioned authority he wielded over thousands of devoted followers. I had just informed him that I owned the deed to his holy sanctuary, and the reality had finally broken his mind. My mother slapped his chest, screaming for him to act like a man, but Joseph just slowly slid down the side of the car until he was sitting on the pavement, weeping openly into his hands. His legacy was gone. His pride was shattered. The brilliant white savior he had paraded around our congregation was currently choking on his own blood, and the loyal black son-in-law he had used to shame my marriage was facing a 5-year federal sentence. I let them fight for another full minute. I wanted them to feel every ounce of the humiliation they had forced me to swallow for the last decade. I watched Camille sobbing hysterically on the lawn, clutching her pregnant belly, realizing that neither of these men could save her now. She was completely cut off from the stolen offshore accounts and entirely abandoned by the two criminals she had manipulated. When Julian let out a pathetic, gurgling plea for mercy, I decided I had seen enough. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers twice. My private security contractors moved with terrifying tactical precision. The two massive guards stepped off my porch and descended on the driveway. They grabbed Marcus by the back of his jacket effortlessly, hauling his thrashing body off Julian. The second guard hauled Julian to his feet, twisting his arm sharply behind his back to neutralize him. Both men were gasping for air, their faces bruised, bleeding, and entirely defeated. "Get them off my property!" I commanded, my voice slicing through the morning air. The guards shoved Marcus and Julian forward, marching them toward the wrought iron gates at the end of my driveway. I walked slowly behind them, my gaze shifting to my parents. "And speaking of property," I said, looking directly down at Pastor Joseph, who was still crying on the concrete. "As the new owner of the church's commercial debt, I have reviewed the asset portfolios. You and Mom currently reside in the luxury parsonage located on the church grounds. It is a beautiful tax-exempt mansion paid for by the hardworking people you scammed. Since EV Holdings now holds the deed to that entire parcel of land, consider this your verbal notice. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the church parsonage before I bulldoze the entire estate to the ground to build something actually useful and beneficial for the community." My mother gasped, the sheer horror of imminent homelessness finally registering on her face. "You cannot evict us from the parsonage," she cried out, her voice trembling with raw panic. "Where are we supposed to go, Naomi? We have no retirement funds left. We spent everything bailing these two idiots out of federal holding. We do not have a single dime to our names." "That sounds like a severe lapse in financial judgment, Mom," I replied coldly, turning my back on her. "You should have kept a better schedule." The security guards physically pushed Julian and Marcus past the property line, dropping them onto the public sidewalk like bags of trash. Camille scurried out behind the bleeding men, keeping her head down, completely stripped of her golden child arrogance. She could not even look the neighbors in the eye. My parents followed, their heads bowed in absolute shame, carrying the heavy weight of their destroyed reputation. The heavy wrought iron gates began to automatically slide shut behind them. My mother suddenly spun around. She lunged forward, grabbing the iron bars before they could lock together. Tears ruined her makeup as she stared through the metal grate. "Naomi, please," my mother begged, her voice cracking with desperate, pathetic sorrow. "You have made your point. You won the war. But you cannot leave us out here with nothing. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water." I stood on the other side of the gate, looking my mother dead in the eye with absolute zero pity. "Not my blood," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of the weakness she had relied on for years. I hit the security remote in my pocket. The massive iron gates clicked shut with a loud, final, echoing slam, sealing them out of my life forever. 3 months later, the heavy mahogany doors of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta swung open. The air inside the courtroom was freezing, a sharp contrast to the blistering summer heat radiating off the city streets outside. I was not sitting in the gallery behind the defense table crying into a tissue. I was not wearing a frumpy mustard yellow dress to make someone else feel comfortable. I was sitting on the witness stand wearing a custom-tailored ivory suit, sworn in as the lead forensic expert witness for the federal prosecution. The trial had been a spectacular, fast-paced bloodbath. When Marcus and Julian brawled in my driveway that morning, they had not just broken each other's noses. They had completely shattered their legal defense. Federal prosecutors usually have to spend months flipping co-conspirators, offering plea deals to get them to turn on one another. But Marcus and Julian had done all the heavy lifting for the government before they even reached the interrogation rooms. Driven by pure ego and the bitter sting of Camille paternity revelation, they had spent the last 90 days throwing each other under the bus. Marcus had eagerly handed over the encrypted hard drives, detailing Julian's shell company operations, desperately trying to paint himself as an innocent victim who was just following his wealthy brother-in-law orders. In retaliation, Julian had provided the FBI with the exact IP addresses and proxy server logs, proving that Marcus was the mastermind behind the fraudulent electronic notary divorce scheme and the forged commercial real estate documents. They were like two drowning men holding on to razor blades, bleeding each other out just to stay afloat. I sat on the stand with perfect posture, answering the United States Attorney questions with cold, calculated precision. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of vindictive joy. I simply laid out the math. I explained how the $5 million was siphoned from the megachurch building fund. I tracked the routing numbers on the giant screens erected in the courtroom, showing the jury exactly how the funds were washed through Delaware and parked in the Cayman Islands. My testimony was airtight, bulletproof, and absolutely lethal. From the witness stand, I looked down at the defense tables. The contrast was almost comical. Julian was wearing a slightly wrinkled designer suit, looking pale and completely stripped of the arrogant swagger he used to parade around my parents' country club. Without his father money to pay for a high-powered legal team, he was sitting next to a visibly exhausted public defender. Marcus looked even worse. His hair was unkempt, and the stress of the trial had aged him a decade and 3 months. He kept shifting in his seat, his eyes darting around the room, still searching for an exit that did not exist. When the jury foreman stood up to read the verdict, the tension in the room snapped like a dry twig. Guilty on all counts. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero patience for corporate greed, did not waste any time moving to the sentencing phase. She looked down at the two men from her elevated bench, her expression filled with absolute disdain. Marcus Vance, the judge, announced, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. You abused your professional license, forged federal documents, and orchestrated a malicious scheme to defraud your community and your wife. I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft to be served consecutively. Marcus' shoulders collapsed. He let out a ragged breath, his head dropping forward until his chin hit his chest. The reality of a 5-year sentence in a federal penitentiary finally crushed the last remaining delusion he held. Julian, the judge, continued, shifting her sharp gaze to my former brother-in-law. You manipulated a religious institution, laundered millions of dollars, and built a criminal enterprise on the back of a fake corporate identity. I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison for money laundering and racketeering. Julian flinched, as if he had been physically struck. He turned around, looking frantically toward the gallery, desperately searching for a friendly face, a lifeline, a savior. He found nothing. Camille was nowhere to be seen. My parents, Pastor Joseph and Patricia, were conspicuously absent, too humiliated and legally exposed to show their faces in a federal building. Before the federal marshals stepped forward to escort them away, Marcus turned his head and looked directly at me. He was standing at the defense table, his hands cuffed in front of him. His eyes were wide, begging for a sliver of sympathy, silently pleading for me to recognize the 10 years we had spent together. He wanted me to look at him with regret or anger or sadness. He wanted to know that he still mattered to me, even if it was just as a villain. I met his gaze. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply lifted my left wrist, casually adjusting the band of my diamond-encrusted designer watch. I checked the time, completely bored, and then I looked away. He was nothing to me now, just a closed file. The federal marshals grabbed them by the arms and led them through the side doors. The heavy click of the locks echoed with beautiful finality. I stepped down from the witness stand and walked out of the courtroom, my heels echoing in the marble hallway. As I pushed open the front doors of the courthouse, the blinding afternoon sun hit my face. The plaza was swarming with reporters, camera crews, and local news anchors. But the cameras were not pointed at me. They were all gathered around a tall, older white man standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps. It was Julian Father, the real billionaire. He had flown in from Delaware not to support his son, but to publicly protect his own corporate empire. I am deeply appalled by the criminal actions of Julian, the older man announced into a cluster of microphones, his voice hard and unforgiving. He has not been affiliated with our family business for over 2 years. His actions do not reflect our corporate values, and we fully support the court decision today. Julian is on his own. He is no longer a part of this family. Julian had spent years using his father's wealth as a weapon to intimidate my family, and now that very same weapon had been used to publicly sever his head. He had zero financial backing, zero familial support, and absolutely no way to appeal his conviction. The reporters began shouting follow-up questions, completely absorbed in the dramatic disowning happening on the courthouse steps. I slipped past the chaotic media circus entirely unnoticed. I walked down the plaza, breathing in the sweet, humid Atlanta air. A sleek, midnight black Maybach was idling at the curb, its tinted windows gleaming in the sunlight. A private driver stepped out, opening the rear door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, adjusting my ivory suit jacket. I did not look back at the courthouse. I did not look back at the reporters. I simply settled into the plush seat, completely unbothered, as the driver pulled away from the curb, carrying me toward a future I now owned completely. My driver navigated the Maybach through Atlanta, leaving the courthouse far behind. The financial empire my parents built on their congregation was officially reduced to ash. Joseph and Patricia were no longer the untouchable royalty of the megachurch circuit. 30 days after I handed them foreclosure notices, my security contractors arrived at the parsonage gates. The eviction was swift, brutal, and entirely legal. I sat in the back of my car reviewing property reports from Attorney Sterling. The massive stone mansion where I endured decades of emotional abuse was completely emptied out. Moving trucks hauled away designer furniture to be auctioned off to cover remaining church debts. The very next morning, the bulldozers arrived. I watched via a live video feed from my office as heavy machinery tore through the grand columns of the parsonage, reducing the monument of their vanity to a pile of rubble. With the church doors padlocked and the financial scandal dominating local news, the 10,000-member congregation scattered instantly. The faithful followers realized their tithes had been funding Julian's sports cars and Camille's diamonds. Joseph and Patricia were completely disgraced. Stripped of their titles and income, they were forced to move into a tiny two-bedroom apartment in a run-down, forgotten suburb on the outskirts of the city. The peeling paint and rattling window air conditioning units were a far cry from the marble floors they were accustomed to. But my mother, true to her narcissistic nature, refused to accept defeat quietly. Patricia still believed she could manipulate public perception and turn the city against the vindictive daughter who had supposedly ruined their innocent lives. A week after their eviction, Patricia marched down to a payphone outside a laundromat near her dismal apartment because her premium cell phone plan had been disconnected. She called the tip line of Atlanta's largest news network. She demanded to speak directly to the lead anchor, launching into a tearful monologue about how her cruel daughter had orchestrated a hostile takeover, stolen the church, and thrown her elderly parents onto the street out of pure spite. She expected camera crews to rush to her rundown apartment to film her crying on a stained couch. Instead, the news anchor simply laughed. The sharp, dismissive sound cut through the phone line. Mrs. Vance, the anchor, said, her voice dripping with professional boredom, "We are not running your story. Your daughter's legal team sent a comprehensive press packet to every major news outlet in the state 48 hours ago. We have the digital access logs showing Julian wiring the church funds. We have the e-notary timestamps proving Marcus forged his divorce documents. Most importantly, we have the signed power of attorney forms proving you willingly handed the congregation's money over to a con artist. You are not a victim. You are a co-conspirator. Do not call this station again." The anchor hung up, leaving my mother standing alone on a cracked sidewalk. The paper trail I meticulously secured was an absolute fortress. I completely annihilated their ability to ever spin the narrative again. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was the architect of their absolute ruin. My driver merged onto the highway, taking a detour through a less developed part of the city due to a collision. The Maybach glided down a street lined with fading strip malls and discount grocery stores. It was the exact neglected suburb where my parents had been forced to relocate. I gazed out the tinted passenger window. The car slowed to a halt at a red light directly in front of a brightly lit discount dollar store. The large glass windows offered a clear view of the checkout lanes. Standing behind register number 3 was my younger sister Camille. The former golden child of the Vance family, the woman who used to flaunt designer maternity gowns and brag about her husband's generational wealth, was unrecognizable. She wore a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform vest over a faded maternity shirt. Her heavily pregnant belly bumped awkwardly against the checkout scanner as she dragged items across the laser. She looked drained and broken. Without Julian's fake credit cards and Marcus's embezzled cash, Camille had been violently shoved off her pedestal. She worked a minimum-wage retail job, standing for 8 hours a day, trying to scrape together loose change to afford diapers for a baby whose father was sitting in a federal penitentiary. The customer in front of her handed over a crumpled handful of dollar bills. Camille sighed, reaching for a dented can of baked beans to drag across the scanner. As she swiped the can, she turned her head and looked out the massive glass window of the dollar store. Her eyes locked directly onto the midnight black Maybach idling at the red light. The presence of the luxury vehicle was unmistakable in this rundown neighborhood. I pressed a button on the armrest. The tinted rear window smoothly rolled down, exposing my face to the bright afternoon sun. Camille froze. The scanner beeped loudly, but she did not move to bag the item. She stared at me, her mouth parting in absolute humiliation. She saw me sitting in a car that cost more than the entire strip mall, wearing a bespoke suit, looking pristine and immensely powerful. I simply maintained cold, detached eye contact, watching the reality of our reversed roles crush whatever remaining pride she possessed. Camille's hand trembled. Her fingers went slack. The heavy can of baked beans slipped from her grasp, plummeting toward the floor and hitting the cheap linoleum with a loud, pathetic thud. She flinched at the sound, her cheeks burning bright red with blistering shame. The traffic light turned green. I hit the button to roll the window back up, sealing myself inside the quiet luxury of the cabin. The Maybach accelerated smoothly down the street, leaving my sister standing frozen behind a cash register, staring at the dust I left behind. I left the discount dollar store in my rearview mirror and headed straight for the heart of the city. The ride back to downtown Atlanta gave me time to clear my head and focus on the future I was building. I directed my driver to pull into the secure underground garage of the towering glass skyscraper that now housed the headquarters of EV Holdings. I rode the private elevator up to the top floor, stepping out into a sleek, ultra-modern penthouse office that overlooked the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The space was a breathtaking testament to absolute financial independence. The walls were painted in sharp, clean tones of slate and white, entirely devoid of the tacky, gaudy gold accents my parents had always plastered over their mega church. My massive mahogany desk sat perfectly positioned in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the empire I now commanded. I sat down in my leather executive chair and opened a thick, organized binder, resting in the center of my desk. I was not looking at corporate acquisitions or commercial debt portfolios today. I was finalizing the architectural blueprints and the legal zoning paperwork for my newest project. I was officially transforming my father's foreclosed megachurch property into a massive community center and financial literacy hub. The cavernous sanctuary where Marcus and Julian were arrested was going to be gutted and rebuilt into safe transitional housing for women escaping domestic and economic abuse. The opulent pastoral suites, where my father had tried to force me to sign away my freedom, were being converted into classrooms, where financial experts would teach vulnerable women how to read bank statements, secure independent credit, and protect themselves from predatory men. My parents had used that property to drain the working class dry. I was going to use it to teach women exactly how to fight back. I was turning the ultimate symbol of my family's narcissistic greed into a fortress of female empowerment. I cross-referenced the construction budget with my foundation's allocated funds, ensuring every single dollar was accounted for and transparently reported. There would be no hidden ledgers in my organization. The heavy glass doors to my office swung open. Attorney Sterling walked in, carrying a polished leather briefcase. He looked around the immaculate penthouse suite, a rare smile breaking through his usually stoic professional demeanor. He walked over to my desk and unclasped his briefcase. "Good afternoon, Naomi," Sterling said, his voice echoing slightly in the spacious room. "I have excellent news. The City Council just expedited the approval for your rezoning requests. The municipal courts have completely cleared the title. I have the final registered deeds right here." He pulled a stack of heavily stamped legal documents from his briefcase and placed them gently on my desk. The property was officially mine to demolish and rebuild. The last remaining ghost of Pastor Joseph's legacy had been legally wiped from the Atlanta County records. "This is incredible work, Sterling," I replied, closing my blueprint binder and standing up from my desk. "I appreciate everything your firm has done to secure this transition. We could not have navigated the municipal red tape without you. Let us celebrate a successful acquisition." I walked over to a sleek mirrored bar cart tucked into the corner of the office. I lifted the heavy glass stopper from a crystal decanter and poured 2 generous measures of an incredibly rare aged scotch. I handed a heavy crystal glass to Sterling. We clinked our glasses together, the sharp, bright sound ringing out as a toast to absolute victory. The scotch burned pleasantly on its way down, tasting like pure, unadulterated freedom. Sterling took a slow sip, looking out the massive windows at the bustling city below. He turned back to me, his expression turning thoughtful and slightly serious. "You know, Naomi," Sterling began, measuring his words carefully. "In my 30 years of practicing estate and corporate law, I have seen a lot of bitter family disputes. I have seen siblings fight over pennies and parents disown children over bad investments. But I have never seen a corrupt family structure dismantled with such ruthless, absolute precision. You completely eradicated their power. I have to ask you honestly. Now that the dust has settled and the courtroom doors are closed, do you feel any regret about destroying your family?" I looked down at the amber liquid swirling in my glass. I thought about my mother forcing me to wear that hideous yellow dress. I thought about my father demanding I empty my retirement account for a white con artist. I thought about Camille rubbing her pregnant belly, taunting my fertility while carrying my husband's child. I thought about Marcus forging my signature to leave me drowning in his commercial debt. I looked Sterling dead in the eye, my face a mask of absolute, unshakable calm. "I didn't destroy them, Sterling," I replied smoothly. "I just handed them the match and the gasoline. They chose to light the fire. They built their entire lives on a foundation of theft, manipulation, and arrogant pride. The math simply caught up to them. I do not regret surviving." Sterling nodded slowly, raising his glass to me in a silent gesture of profound respect. He understood perfectly. Before he could say another word, a sharp, distinctive chime echoed from my encrypted laptop resting on the desk. It was the high-priority notification sound I had specifically assigned to my primary private wealth accounts. I set my glass of scotch down on the coaster and walked back over to my desk. I woke the computer screen and logged into the highly secure banking portal. A new authenticated message from the federal bankruptcy court was sitting in my secure inbox. I clicked open the message. The federal courts had officially concluded the total liquidation of Marcus's commercial real estate brokerage. Because I had shrewdly purchased his toxic commercial loans through EV Holdings before the federal indictments dropped, I was legally recognized as his primary secured creditor. The bankruptcy courts had seized every single asset attached to his name. They auctioned off his office furniture, his computer servers, his company vehicles, and drained the last remaining legitimate capital from his business accounts. The court order explicitly mandated that the liquidated funds be transferred directly to me as financial restitution for the fraudulent divorce and the identity theft damages. I stared at the incoming deposit amount flashing in bright green numbers across my screen. I did the mental arithmetic in a fraction of a second. When I combined the court-ordered restitution from Marcus's ruined business with the recovered, seized funds from Julian's dismantled shell company, the total sum was staggering. The money they had desperately tried to steal had ironically been forcefully routed straight into my personal accounts. I looked at the total net worth displayed at the top of my banking dashboard. My wealth had not just stabilized, it had grown exponentially. With the influx of their liquidated assets, I was officially richer today than the exact moment I received the initial $85 million inheritance from Great Aunt Beatrice. Their greed had literally made me wealthier. I smiled, feeling the absolute perfection of the numbers aligning on my screen. I closed the encrypted laptop, letting the soft click resonate through the quiet luxury of my penthouse office. I stood up from my mahogany desk and smoothed the lapels of my bespoke ivory suit. I walked toward the heavy glass doors leading out to my private wrap-around terrace. I pushed them open and stepped out into the warm, humid Atlanta evening. The city stretched out beneath me, an endless ocean of glittering lights and rushing headlights painting the highways in ribbons of gold and crimson. The evening breeze caught the edge of my jacket, but I stood perfectly still, resting my hands on the cool metal railing. From this altitude, the world looked incredibly small, and the people who had tried to destroy me looked even smaller. I looked down at the sprawling metropolis and allowed myself a moment of absolute, undisturbed peace. The journey from the overlooked, discarded middle child to the unquestioned master of my own fate had been brutal, but the view from the top was entirely worth the climb. For my entire life, I had been force-fed the lie that my quiet nature was a weakness. My mother Patricia had treated my compliance as an invitation to turn me into the family punching bag, constantly forcing me to shrink so her favorite daughter could shine. My father Joseph had used my stability as a rug to wipe his feet on while he chased the glittering illusion of Julian's fake generational wealth, handing over the keys to his congregation just to secure a spot at the country club. My sister Camille had treated my life like a bargain bin. She could raid whenever she felt bored or jealous, stealing my money, my reputation, and eventually my husband without a single ounce of remorse. And Marcus, the man who had promised to stand by me before God and the state of Georgia, had looked at my loyalty and seen an easy target for financial slaughter. He thought he could saddle me with his catastrophic corporate debt while he flew off to a tropical island with my own flesh and blood. They all thought my silence meant I was blind to their cruelty. They mistook my patience for stupidity. They never realized that while they were busy shouting, bragging, and fighting for the spotlight, I was quietly observing every single vulnerability they possessed. I was counting the receipts, tracking the lies, and mapping out the structural weaknesses of the massive, gaudy pedestal they had placed themselves upon. They built their entire universe on a foundation of deceit, and I was the structural engineer who finally kicked out the load-bearing pillar. The cool breeze whipped my hair across my shoulder. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet southern air. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for what I had done to them. Guilt is an emotion reserved for people who inflict unprovoked harm. What I delivered was absolute, unadulterated consequence. I gave them exactly what they had earned. Every foreclosure, every federal indictment, every humiliating public revelation was simply the harvest of the bitter seeds they had planted themselves. Society constantly pushes the toxic narrative that family is an unbreakable bond dictated strictly by biology. We are told to forgive the unforgivable, to turn the other cheek when our own blood strikes us, and to endure endless emotional abuse simply because we share the same last name. But sitting in that law office 3 months ago, staring at the fake divorce papers Marcus had forged to ruin me, I had an epiphany that changed the trajectory of my entire existence. Family is not defined by blood at all. It is defined entirely by respect. It is defined by the people who protect you when you are vulnerable, not the people who push you into the line of fire to save themselves. When the people who are supposed to love you most decide to dig a hole and try to bury you alive, you do not sit in the dirt and cry. You do not ask them why they are holding the shovels. You buy the entire graveyard, and you become the one who decides who gets evicted. A sharp vibration in the pocket of my blazer broke through my thoughts. I pulled out my phone and glanced at the glowing screen. It was an incoming call from a blocked caller ID. The automated text transcription service kicked in immediately, translating a voicemail being left in real time from a secure federal correctional facility. I read the words flashing across my screen. It was Marcus. Naomi, his transcribed voice pleaded, the desperation practically dripping from the digital text. Naomi, please pick up the phone. I know you hate me. I know I messed up. But I am begging you. The guys in here are animals. Julian will not even look at me in the yard, and my parents will not accept my collect calls. I have absolutely nothing left. My commissary account is completely empty. I cannot even afford a bar of soap or a decent meal. You have millions of dollars, Naomi. You took my whole life. Just put $500 on my books. Please, baby, I am begging you. Do not leave me in here to rot like this. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the pathetic words of a man who had tried to leave me holding the bag for a massive federal fraud scheme. A man who had slept with my sister and planned to run away to the Caribbean on stolen church funds while I faced the FBI. He had mocked my reliable sedan and my government salary. He had called me boring. Now he was begging for soap money from the woman he had secretly divorced. I did not feel a shred of pity. I did not feel the urge to call him back and gloat. I felt absolutely nothing for him. He was a stranger, an irrelevant footnote in the story of my rise. I tapped the screen once. The prompt appeared, asking if I wanted to delete the message. I hit confirm. The voicemail vanished into the digital void, permanently erased from my life, exactly like the man who had left it. I slid the phone back into the pocket of my ivory suit. I looked up at the vibrant orange and purple hues of the Atlanta sunset painting the horizon. The city was mine. The future was mine. I turned my back on the setting sun, a genuine smile spreading across my face, and walked confidently through the heavy glass doors. I stepped back into the sleek, quiet luxury of my empire and let the doors seal shut behind me.